7 years old when I went to the movie theater with my father, me, and my older brother to go see a conky old movie called The 300 Spartans. Starring Richard Keegan, and it told the story of the Battle of Thermopylae and the heroism and sacrifice of these brave soldiers. When I was a little boy, wide-eyed, I was already dedicated to heroes. I was already following Superboy, the Legion of Superheroes, and Batman, and I was already drawing and writing my own comic books. And one thing about the comic books at the time was that the heroes always won. Needless to say, they always survived because there had to be a next issue. The movie ended, and all of the Spartans had arrows in them and were lying there dead. And my brother Steve and I sat talking for a while quietly between each other, and finally, my brother Steve was when we decided to talk to my dad. He was sitting in front of us because neither of us wanted to be seen, being watched by an adult. And Steve leaned over and talked quietly with my dad. My dad just nodded his head slowly and then turned back and he said, "Yes, Frank, I'm afraid they're all dead." And all of a sudden my whole view of what heroes were completely changed. And it's never changed back. That heroes were people who did the right thing and didn't give up. Damn the consequences. At great personal risk. They weren't the ones who would have the parade thrown for them or become wealthy for doing it. They were the people who did the right thing. This has guided my whole creative life. Anyways, so time passed and I got to do comics for a living, and I always told myself, if I ever got good enough, I'd do this story. Then I got to work with Dark Horse Comics, which was the first publisher that I ever worked with, where I had such wonderful creative freedom that I was able to do my dream of doing Sin City. And one day I decided, well, I'm still scared of this 300 Spartans thing. But if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. And I called up Mike Richardson, and he said, I've got a really weird project for you. He immediately signed on, ready to do this. We got rolling.
Make some noise for him.
Because I just reread all that. What made you come up with the format? As far as the
The format came the old line form follows function, the one that architects use. It said as I was drawing it, I realized this is about a land battle. Everything's happening horizontally, and comic books with their vertical size, it's great for people who can fly and climb rooftops and stuff, but or for when you're getting really intimate.
It's very cinematic. Mostly, it's not like a film, actually.
Well, I didn't even think of it that way, really. I just thought, look, this involves people running, it involves horses, for goodness another big problem. I had to learn on the horse.
You did very well, actually.
Thanks a lot. But but it was really because I wanted to be to take it, to make the comic fit the story rather than have the story fit the comic.
I read in a fabulous book, if you guys are fans of comic creators and their thought process, it's a book called Artisan Comic Book Art. And you discussed in 300 how one of the functional efforts that you put into it was to make sure that we as the reader had to take in an entire page before we could move on to the next with the horizontal landscape orientation. And that is such a thoughtful, creative venture when it comes to the form of comics, not just telling a story, but actually expressing how we experience that as readers. And I think that speaks volumes to you and your genius level. Is there another project that you would love to play around like that?
Yeah, but if I start talking about my future
Fair game.
I'll be driving nuts.
No, not nuts.
It'll be a whole Barry is another one of those guys that's, you know, full of gas about projects we're never going to get to see. But what you just said though, it does make me think about one of the colleagues I have who's taught me the most, not just by example, but because he's a born teacher, is Walter Simons. And Walter and I shared studio space for years in Manhattan, during which time I learned a great deal from him and from Howard Shakin as well. And it was, and Walter and I were talking once about putting pages together, and he said that he you know, he had developed his own theory about how different artists put pages together differently and how much it reveals about the way they think. Yeah. And how Walter, for instance, builds them much like a piece of architecture. That's why his pages have such strength. There's nobody like him for things. The strength of the page, right? It's got me more and more thinking about how the format of a project has everything to do with the project you're going to make. Since we are the small, scrappy form that nobody's really paying attention to, we need to use every trick of the book. You know, that is, we do not have the overwhelming power and the ability to hit so many senses as cinema does, for instance. But we can do certain things to charm that usurp, say, some of the appurtenances that go into children's books and this and that to suck in the reader or to give them a different experience. Again, is getting back to 300. It was that horizontal shape that I learned to. It changed me as an artist, composing that way. And to me, making a horizontal shape into a dramatic space was a real breakthrough.
Oh my goodness. And I think we still adore every ounce of creativity that you put into those pages, for sure. And you were just saying that you just reread it. And this is one of those works that, even as a seasoned professional as yourself, when you read it, you get something new out of it every time you look at it.
I still remember when it came out.
Oh yes.
Frank, you correct me if I'm wrong with this, but wasn't that the first time it wasn't anything in that format?
I think so.
Yeah, that elongated format?
Well, look, I had to speak it out that way. At first it came out as normal comics.
Right.
And they were just, we're double spaced.
Right, but still, the cinematic, it was just, the way you laid everything out, just drew me right into it. I mean, and it still, to this day, sucks me right into it. You feel like you're part of it when you're reading it.
That's great, thanks, man.
Simone, I think it's important to know 300 as a story, how that might play internationally. Here, we got it, and immediately next year it wins the Eisner, and without question, it makes sense as to why. Did that play very well on the world stage?
Absolutely.
Please let us know more.
Being Italian and so being so close to Greek, of course, we grew up with like classic mythology. So that story of the Spartans were a very well-known story for all of us. So, but it was just a completely different take on the story, which makes so perfectly in time when it actually came out. And one thing that really you guys were talking about, I guess, more of us from a storytelling point of view, which of course Frank is the master of them all. It's also a brilliant color palette choice, which is something that really stood up from all the other comic books. It was a very simple yet perfectly effective color palette. We had this little talk in Luca once, how a colorist can either destroy or improve your work.
Yeah.
And in this case, I think this warm, dark yellow and the red of the cape, very simple choices, which makes the whole story work much better than maybe a marked darker or colder palette.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, then you of course, obviously, I have to make attention if the colorist yourself.
Oh yeah, I didn't want to do it myself.
When Varley brought to it was just so much intelligence.
Yeah.
And abstract thinking where it was really needed. So our use of the earth.
Yes, earth tones, perfect.
Was critical, but it also it made the capes work all the better.
Absolutely. It's like Schindler's List. It's everything in black and white, and you only have a
little bit of color.
Yes. Okay, if I can mention this little story. So we're in Luca. It was the second time that I met Frank, and I was, of course, overexcited. So I don't know why we got into talking about this colorist, issue. Which again, I mean, all of us doing this job, we know how much it can benefit or even really destroy your work. And he goes like, tell me about that. When I found a very good colorist, I married her. I remember, oh yeah, it's right.
Sometimes that's how you gotta do that, okay? You gotta keep that in mind.
Yeah.
You said genius for a reason. Okay?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's a wonderful thing. Now, when it comes to the actual artwork for 300 and the process for creating, what was the size of the boards that you were using to capture such movement, such energy and everything?
I went to the size the comic books used to be, and had my own artboard printed up. Before the advent of the photocopier, the comic book art was done 4 times the size of reproduction, or what's referred to as twice up, because the page is literally twice the height. And they shrunk the paper for 2 reasons. One was because artists would work much faster, working smaller. But the other, I was told, had to do with the fact that the photocopiers were, the cheaper photocopiers were 11 by 17. Oh, I believe the first one was absolutely true. The second one's arguably, but the way they cut expenses in those days, it could easily be true. But in any case, they were speeding up the production every which way. Of course. But what had changed was the market itself, the marketplace itself, with the direct market coming in, the comic shops emerged as the biggest factor changing the face of comics that had really come along. There was the combination of the comic book shops, which really were the children of the head shops that had sold the underground comics when they were selling marijuana for these drug dealers had developed the best distribution system anybody saw.
True.
And all of a sudden there was a direct market, which was so much more profitable that it kept comics from ceasing to exist. They saved comics, and they changed comics forever, and I believe for the better.
Oh, absolutely. Support your local comic shop. Yeah, super important. So, as you are looking back at this work, is there something that you look at now and you go, how did I do that? Is there anything that you've been able to divorce yourself from times that you can look at it and appreciate it the same way that we do?
It's still the story. It's still the story I've been loving. I mean, it's there's stuff I say. Why didn't I do this? You know, boy, I wish I'd known about this over here. And when can I do this, and this that are related to it? But when something, you know, when you throw yourself heart and soul into something and it works out, you don't.
That's fair.
Man, it was a dream project that worked out pretty awesome.
Absolutely. To get it optioned into a movie, Zack Snyder grabs a hold of it, sees the absolute beauty, and literally brought your pages to life. When you saw that for the first time, what was your experience like with that?
I can quote the exact words that flashed through my head.
Uh-oh.
I believe they were hot damn. I went from being totally shy about movies, and then between two men, my attitude was completely transformed, because it was Zack Snyder on one project and Robert Rodriguez on another. I got the kind of entry into the world of cinema that if you could even dream of having. Because, I mean, I banged around a project or two before as a screenwriter, and had the more or less typical experience that a novice would have. But but this was too good to be true.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I do want to give an opportunity for you guys to talk about your covers that you've done. So, Andy, to approach, you know, again, seminal work like this, and getting to help celebrate the 25th. You know, what was your mindset? Like, what do I capture? How do I do
screw it up?
Come on now. Do you not know who you are? There is no screwing this up.
Oh yeah, you don't know me that well. No, it's just like when I approached, like, drew Dark Knight 3. Okay. To approach a page, how can you not be influenced by the source material?
Of course.
So it was so hard, you know, not to swipe them, you know. So I had to put down all my 300 stuff, everything. I just had to put it down, put it aside, come out with a layout myself. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something. I want to say honor, you know, 300 for the most part. Yeah, so just in the layout and the composition and everything that Frank had, when I was working on Dark Knight with Frank, and Frank would go over my layouts, I tried to incorporate everything as much as I could that he had explained to me into that one piece.
That's right.
And hopefully I didn't screw it up.
Not, no screws up at all. No screws up at all. No, wait, stop me if I'm wrong. Is honor not
Well,
one of the
I
things?
was going over it.
No, you look, send you the way. You give the feedback. The best. Okay, my father used to go over all my stuff. You know, when I was starting out.
Oh, I'm sure I was just as harsh as Joe Gilbert too. Yeah.
You can hit me. No, you never.
Yeah.
Welcome to therapy session, guys. So we do.
He's an abused child. Now he's starting to cry.
No, my dad would actually, he was very stern at times. Yes, but, no, you were great. I mean, you said about the negative, positive space, which you were absolutely right. I still remember every little thing that you said about this stuff, and I still incorporate that into things I do today.
A lot of that was me just warning you about that. I do remember saying the most important piece of advice I have for anybody, which is you've always got to remember that writers are a superstitious cowardly lot.
That is true.
So give them a lot of room.
Yeah.
Because they're going to use a lot more words than they should.
I have to also tell you, there was, and this is a little bit off from 300. Frank has had the artist edition of Sin City.
There you go.
And Klaus Jansen and I did a little portrait of Frank in the back and got printed. And I went up to Frank's studio to pick up my copy of it. So Frank, we were just looking at the beautiful edition of Sin City. But Frank is going over each page, and you would love this too. He's explaining to me
Wow.
why and how he's doing each panel and each layout, and I'm like, I wish I was recording this. I wish I was recording it. A lot of it I do remember, but I don't think you realize how much that helped me out. So, yeah, that's one of the
Makes so much sense. How did you approach your cover work for this particular piece?
Okay, first off, I want you to understand that I grew up literally on Frank's book.
Of course.
And so when I got the email, I guess it was about a year ago, I panicked. I was like, wow, what? And of course, I knew the book by heart. I love the movie, like it's even useless to say. And so, but it's pretty much the same approach that Andy, I was gonna call you Andy. The hand Andy had, like I put everything aside and I'm desperately trying to come up with something my own. As a matter of fact, this result in me doing, I guess, 7 or 8 different sketches, which is something that I rarely do for Marvel DC. Usually it's either 1, 2, but I was so, it was so important for me to give my very best, and I wanted to give the editors, more options to pick up the right one. So I had one. I know that Frank is a huge Sergio fan. So maybe my favorite one was again. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, really? Yeah. So I wanted to like homage at the same time Frank and Sergio, because Sergio for us, for Italian artists, has been I'm sure the biggest influence of all of us. And I want to, like paying an homage to the two masters together, especially knowing that Frank was such a huge fan of Sergio. So I came up with this negative, playing around with this negative space of soldier and the cape. But for whatever reason, that one didn't get picked up. It was, yes, the cape and the sword shape. Mm-hmm. And instead, they wanted me to basically do what I did, which is with all the arrows. It's basically an homage to the very end of the movie itself, like the ultimate sacrifice.
Of course.
It's interesting because what's interesting. It sounds like you were thinking of Leone, and if they want to include
Two different
Very,
timelines.
no, very related to it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, sure.
It's but it is fascinating what mixes up your head in doing this stuff, because
Yeah.
the main thing is to me is what fascinates me is that 300 is actually a very small story about a battle that, you know, many historians dismiss as being very unimportant.
Yeah.
And nothing but a defeat
Yeah.
for the West. Because technically, militarily, it was just defeat. The Persians went on to just clobber the crap out of Greece and Europe. But it was such a moral victory, and it became this just unending song of freedom that the tide turned.
Yeah.
And that's what great stories are made of.
Without question, without question. I also find that in rereading 300, it becomes almost a daily motivation about finding a way to move forward even when it's impossible. And though we're not necessarily at war in the traditional sense, any things that we come across that might seem challenging to us, the story of Leonidas and the 300 will always kind of push you forward. The idea of, you know, finding the wolf, killing the wolf, and then coming back king. That's how you conquer your fears. That's how you conquer your difficulties. And that's just the beginning of the book. Like you got so much more to reach into and get as inspiration. What is one of the things that you've heard that someone has been inspired to do because of your work with 300?
To do?
If anyone has been so specific.
Piercings?
That's it's very poignant. Very poignant.
No,
Like-
I have been told by a couple of Marines, not that it affected them, how they, what they did, but just that they were like Odanabe tattoos and such, that, you know, one of the 300 slogans, and that there's much of that tale that has been taught among the Marines, not because of me, but that the story of the Battle of Thermopylae is such an example of how a small, well-trained force can accomplish the impossible. But as far as how it's actually affected people, there's some people who've talked about how just motivationally it seems like, you know, to encourage bravery and so on. But I'm not going to start saying that people come to me by the thousands saying you saved my life.
Well, I will say that. In many cases, I believe that that's very true. And again, when it comes to your work, having already had so many seminal pieces on your resume, for 300 to be something that stands out even more is a constant statement of how you grow, how you learn as a comic creator, never resting on your laurels. I think that is one of the biggest inspirations us as creators can take from that. And we thank you for that tremendously. Anything else?
Let that be a lesson to you also. Keep your eyes out.
Yes.
There's
yes.
like great stuff out there, and some of it actually happened.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the brilliant part. The absolute brilliant part. Is there anything else that you can tell us as a behind the scenes about 300 and its creation that we may not know, have never heard of before?
Man,
He's going to tell us that he posed for all of the Leonidas stuff.
no. I've worn them. And they're cushions. Then they're made out of bronze, which is a soft metal, so you've got to use a lot of it to give yourself some teeth protection. This has several effects. Because they wanted to make them good and scary looking, they gave them that very fierce face. That very fierce face has rather narrow, very narrow eye holes. You can't see a damn thing. You know, I don't know how they did it because you have next to no peripheral vision. You can't see from side to side hardly at all. Some ways I think that was good thinking because that meant you were just focused on the guy you were there to kill. But you also can't hear much. And so I'm thinking, these guys went in battle just like they were in such isolation. But when you think of what those men actually were going through, they were facing an endless opponent with and it was the only weapon they really had was a spear. They carried a sword, but they only pulled the sword out when the spear was broken, in which case you were dead in trouble. And the spears broke a lot. And so I something that I were I all of a sudden telling this kind of story again, I would try to do a bit more is get into the psyche and combat of all of that. So instead I'm just blabbering to y'all about it. So,
No, we appreciate that. Thank you so very much, not just for this particular work, but the entirety of your career thus far and
Thank you very
ongoing.
much.